Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first installment of our microlearning series for NICU professionals. My name is Diana Marrero, and I am a family support specialist here at Hand to Hold. This three-part series was created to help equip NICU professionals like yourself with the tools you need to support the families in your care with empathy, resilience, and confidence. Each installment of this series is worth one continuing education credit for NICU nurses. We'll share a link to the survey at the end of each presentation. For those new to Hand to Hold, we are a national nonprofit 501(c)(3) that is dedicated to providing early intervention mental health support before, during, and after a NICU stay, ensuring that all NICU families thrive. Support is provided in English and Spanish at no cost to families. Visit us at handtohold.org to learn more. Today, we are excited to share this first installment in the series, Hands That Heal, the human side of NICU nursing, with Cynthia Shogreen. NICU nurses carry heavy emotional loads. In this presentation, you'll learn how to recognize signs of burnout and compassion fatigue, apply stress-reducing strategies, and support NICU families facing trauma and PTSD. I am thrilled to introduce our speaker, Cynthia Shogreen. Cynthia is a member of our counseling team here at Hand to Hold and serves our families as a bilingual licensed mental health counselor. She has a love of psychology and is passionate about helping families find balance and self-awareness. Raising children with special development needs has shaped Cynthia's career path and her love for helping parents living with full hands and full hearts. She is a board-certified behavior analyst and works with families affected by a developmental diagnosis. Cynthia strives to provide excellent service and support, a sense of community, and a safe space for NICU families. Welcome, Cynthia.
Thank you. I'm excited to share this presentation with all of you today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And as we get started, I invite everyone to take all this information just at face value. Take all of whatever serves you from this presentation, whatever you can apply as soon as tomorrow in your NICUs, in your offices, in your place of service, to not only enhance your experience as a provider, but also to protect your overall well-being. Thank you, Diana, for that lovely introduction. And as was shared, this presentation is titled Hands That Heal, the Human Side of NICU Nursing. I want to welcome everyone again for taking the time to learn all of these strategies for your well-being and the well-being of those you care for. Today, we'll be focusing on a topic that's often overlooked, but incredibly important, which is your mental health as NICU professionals. The entire premise of this presentation is that your well-being matters too. So let's go over a few of our learning objectives today. Today, you will recognize mental health challenges unique to the NICU setting and unique to your profession. You will identify early signs of compassion fatigue and burnout and learn to tell the difference. You will learn how to apply some coping strategies to manage stress and some preventative measures for burnout and compassion fatigue. We'll talk a bit about effective mental health supports to NICU families, to provide all other caregivers in the NICU space. And we'll take a deeper look into trauma and PTSD for all in the NICU environment, caregivers and parents alike. So let's dive into the specific mental health challenges that we can find in the NICU. Those challenges have several different origin points, some of which include high-stake decision-making and life or death scenarios on a daily basis, continuous and prolonged exposure to fragile infants and distressed families, often long shifts, sleep disruptions, alarm fatigue, and of course, moral distress when outcomes are uncertain or poor and families are also experiencing distress. This is not an exhaustive list by any means, just a few of the many stressors that are chronic and cumulative in the NICU setting. As I said previously, this session is about you as caregivers and human beings, not just about your clinical care. I would like you to keep in mind the old saying, we can't pour from an empty cup. And to add on to there, that taking care of our mental health is not selfish, it's essential, and it's part of being a dedicated NICU professional. The NICU environment is intense, and it combines so many different origins of stressors. And without the proper tools, it can be very easy to fall into unhealthy coping habits. It could be very easy to fall into compassion fatigue without realizing you're slipping into compassion fatigue. And of course, burnout. And later in this talk, we will dive deeper into what those are and what those differences are. So let's start with trauma. Just a quick overview of trauma. When we talk trauma in the NICU, we often are focused on parents and their experience, which is in fact often traumatizing, but staff experience trauma too. One of the most common forms among caregivers is vicarious trauma. This might be a term you've heard before, or it might be a completely new terminology that you're experiencing now. Vicarious trauma is something we find often across medical fields, first responders, and professions that deal directly with families. So what is vicarious trauma? Vicarious trauma is defined as the emotional residue or strain that comes from hearing about and witnessing the suffering of others, especially when that is happening repeatedly and chronically. In other words, vicarious trauma is the result of experiencing others' distress day in and day out. It's different from burnout in a few ways. Vicarious trauma specifically results from that exposure to others' trauma over time. This is what sets vicarious trauma apart from all other kinds of trauma and all other kinds of occupational burnout. Vicarious trauma is unique in that it is an emotional exhaustion. In the NICU, you may not be the one experiencing the trauma directly, but you are constantly exposed to life and death situations, medical emergencies, grieving parents, and uncertain outcomes. That repeated exposure does not come without a cost. Good news is there are ways to prevent vicarious trauma. There are some antecedent interventions that we can put in place to lessen the effects of vicarious trauma. And if you're already experiencing some of these symptoms of vicarious trauma, there's ways to alleviate some of that strain. So let's discuss a bit about how vicarious trauma shows up. So there are many emotional signs. Like I said, vicarious trauma is often referred to as an emotional exhaustion. So some of those emotional signs can be sadness, irritability, anxiety, and there's also numbness. You might notice that you're not as involved as you once were. You might notice that things that used to really pull at your heartstrings don't pull as hard anymore. Or things that were once really important, especially in your workplace, are not as important anymore. You might also feel detachment from your coworkers, the families you serve, your place of work. if you have any special involvement in any sort of way in your place of work, and it's not as important as it used to be. And you might also feel some detachment from your own loved ones. Something to keep in mind about vicarious trauma is that it's not exclusive to your place of work and can make its way into your personal life. You might also experience cognitive changes, some of those being intrusive thoughts, difficulty concentrating, and preoccupation with your patients outside of work. We all, to some degree, take some of our work home, but having constant intrusive thoughts about your concerns about your patients or your patients' families when outside of work is something to keep an eye on, especially when we're considering vicarious trauma. And there are some physical symptoms that often correlate with fatigue and exhaustion, like headaches, sleep disturbances, low energy. Some things to consider when we're checking for and assessing for vicarious trauma. And then lastly, there are behavioral changes, withdrawal, cynicism, loss of empathy, and then also hypervigilance. I would challenge all of you to consider where you were when you first started in the field. What was your level of empathy then versus now? What was your level of cynicism then versus now? And then what was your level of hypervigilance? These specific behavioral changes, cynicism, empathy, and hypervigilance, can be hard to correlate in a medical setting, considering that there are specific parts of our work that require some empathy, some hypervigilance, and a healthy amount of that is all right. But use yourself as a baseline and think back on where you were in the beginning of your journey as a professional, and where you are now. Or consider where you were last year, the year before that, and where you are now. Consider you might find yourself waking up thinking about a particular baby, or replaying a patient's grief, or feeling emotionally overwhelmed after a shift without being able to really pinpoint why. Now, we have to consider that NICU nurses are a particular high risk for vicarious trauma. The emotional attachment to patients and families, especially during a long NICU stay, can be a huge contributing factor to vicarious trauma. Then when you consider the repeated exposure to infant deaths or traumatic births, all of those things that we have to work through and process in a matter of seconds, minutes, before moving on to the next patient and the next task that requires our attention. Also consider the pressure that NICU nurses are under to remain strong or professional when witnessing devastating and distressing events. And then lastly, consider the culture in the NICU nurse world of putting patient needs before your own. The expectation that your patient and your families need to be first. All of those things added together make for an especially high risk for vicarious trauma in the NICU profession, specifically for NICU nurses that have the highest level of one-to-one contact with patients and families. So let's move on with how this impacts your well-being every day. Thinking on how this correlates with your well-being and your overall performance as a medical professional, let's consider emotional exhaustion, anxiety symptoms and depressive symptoms, reduced empathy and detachment from patients and how that affects performance, impaired concentration and clinical judgment, and again, how that correlates to performance, and increased absenteeism and turnover, which we all know directly affects all our patients and their families. So connecting to your mental health directly correlates to patient safety and directly correlates to the culture in your current unit. All of these stressors listed on this slide can lead to huge emotional exhaustion and your reduced ability to empathize from family to family. The toll that this has on your performance at work is worth recognizing. And for many NICU nurses, recognizing the connection between your well-being and your performance with your families can be a good push to help create systems of support or to seek out support outside the space of work. Now let's tackle compassion fatigue versus burnout. Compassion fatigue can be described as sudden trauma-related emotional depletion, another form of one of those emotional exhaustions. Burnout, on the other hand, is a term we use often, and it describes gradual loss of motivation, energy, and purpose. I like to think of burnout as an environmental symptom. Both of these can coexist, and unfortunately, they often amplify each other. Let's dig deeper. Compassion fatigue, it's usually sudden, and it usually happens right after exposure to trauma. Burnout is something that grows gradually with chronic exposure to stress. These terms are often used interchangeably, but they actually describe very different experiences. Compassion fatigue and burnout are both highly relevant in the NICU, and many of us, unfortunately, are carrying signs of both. So digging into compassion fatigue is also often referred to as secondary traumatic stress, and it very closely correlates with vicarious trauma. Compassion fatigue often comes from a deep emotional investment in others' suffering, especially when we're witnessing repeated trauma, grief, and vulnerability. It can come on suddenly after a particularly traumatic event. Think of a fetal loss, a long NICU stay that ends in loss, or seeing a patient break down in grief. Seeing families work through a loss, having emotional attachments to your patients after they've had long stays that don't end as you or the family would have expected. All of those scenarios can lead to compassion fatigue and the emotional distance that we experience when we are in compassion fatigue. Think of it this way. Compassion fatigue is what happens when your heart gets tired from caring so deeply over and over without time or space to process. Importantly, feeling emotional exhaustion after a hard day or after a tough loss is to be expected and is typical. What we're talking about here, as far as compassion fatigue, is repeated exposure to that without the proper tools or space to process those emotions or experiences. Symptoms of compassion fatigue may include feeling emotionally numb or detached from parents or families. Think of it as having all of your emotions set up in queue and all of the experiences you've had waiting in a line to be processed in your mind. Eventually, there won't be much space left for new experiences to be processed and emotionally digested. So the result is feeling emotionally distant. Other symptoms to look out for is avoiding emotional engagement because it feels too overwhelming. And that directly connects to that previous example of having too many experiences and emotions in queue waiting to be processed. Also, often guilt comes around. Oftentimes, guilt comes in the form of not feeling guilty about not feeling as connected as you should be, in quotation marks, should, or feeling guilty about not being as connected as you want to be or used to be. And then there is also the physical exhaustion that comes into play, which can be attributed to trouble sleeping, intrusive thoughts, or an unhealthy sleep schedule. All of those things together could be seen as symptoms of compassion fatigue. Now let's jump into burnout. Again, burnout is something most of us have heard of, and a lot of people use the term burnout to describe when they are tired, not having a good week at work, or exhausted from systems that do not serve them at work. However, burnout is a chronic condition caused by ongoing stress, systematic strain, and feeling unsupported. The issue is not necessarily the stress, but the system in place at work that does not support recuperation from stress. Importantly, burnout builds slowly, sometimes over months or even years. In healthcare, burnout is often tied to workloads, lack of control, poor leadership support, and emotional disconnection. Again, burnout is often a symptom of the environment, not the person. Having the proper tools to work through stress and traumatic exposure is a good preventative way to avoid burnout. Having the proper systems in place can go a long way. Some symptoms to look out for burnout include feeling drained and dreading your work. Think about you driving for your shift and just dreading the drive there, dreading parking, dreading getting out of your car and walking into your unit. That is a huge symptom of burnout. Loss of motivation, and importantly, loss of meaning in your work. If you have lost the connection to why your work is worth it and why your work is meaningful, you might be experiencing burnout. Irritability and resentment towards your coworkers or the job itself is also a big red flag. Growing resentment towards your workspace is often correlated with burnout. And then internally, a decreased sense of personal and professional accomplishment, feeling like your work, again, does not matter, or that your work does not accomplish anything, especially in the medical field, is a big symptom of burnout. Especially when you consider that the work done in NICU spaces is life-saving. So burnout often sounds like, what is the point? Why am I here? While compassion fatigue sounds like, I can't feel anymore. Now let's spend some time on how they interact, how these two different psychological spaces can interact and amplify each other. Though they are not the same, they often occur together. Compassion fatigue untreated can lead to burnout, and burnout can make you more vulnerable to compassion fatigue. Both reduce empathy, increase errors, and contribute to moral distress. Together, compassion fatigue and burnout can make it really hard to do your work, and importantly, it can make it really hard to do your work well. So why does this matter in the NICU? NICU nurses are especially at risk because they provide care in life and death situations and build long-term relationships with families. When you lose a baby or see a parent suffer, you feel it. And it happens, and when it happens repeatedly, it changes you. Unlike many other hospital units, NICU care often involves recurrent grief and prolonged trauma. It involves bonds with family that deepen the emotional impact. And it involves the need to stay calm and composed and highly technical, even when emotionally raw. An important point to make here is that compassion fatigue and burnout are not signs of weakness. They are signs that you've been too strong for too long without enough support. Naming them is not a failure, it is a beginning. Let's consider some of the early warning signs. Things to look out for so that you may intervene before things get too bad are listed in this slide here. And while we talk about these, I encourage you to engage in some self-reflection and see if you can catch some of these signs early. Look for signs like poor sleep and constant, persistent fatigue, irritability, emotional numbness, cynicism towards colleagues, patients' families, or even your work in general. Feeling like you're on autopilot during care, that checked out sort of feeling. Then a decline in your job satisfaction and that feeling and that fulfillment that your job used to provide you, is that still there? And then thinking about your performance, thinking about the kind of practitioner you were in the beginning a year ago or 2 years ago. We often spot all of these signs in others before we can admit them in ourselves. So this is why I encourage some of that self-reflection. And being that we do often spot these in others before ourselves, having specific systems at play at work, or having peers, trusted peers, hold you accountable when some of these symptoms are present or visible, can also be very helpful. Now let's discuss some action points. Let's discuss coping strategies. Now that we've learned what these symptoms look like in practice, let's talk a little bit about what we can do about it. Importantly, when we're talking about coping strategies, you do not need a spa weekend to feel better. Spa weekend does not hurt, but there are many practical things you can do on a daily basis, many times a day, to help keep your well-being in mind. Mindfulness, grounding techniques, and brief breathing exercises between patient care can reduce stress and recenter you throughout the day. Now, we know the stress in the NICU isn't going away anytime soon. So the goal is not to eliminate stress, but to learn to manage it in ways that are sustainable, realistic, and grounded in evidence. So let's talk about why coping strategies matter. Studies show that nurses who engage in regular coping and resilience practices lower their levels of burnout, anxiety, and PTSD symptoms. The brain and body can learn to regulate stress more efficiently and with consistent, even brief practice. Just like we train our clinical skills, we can train our emotional regulation skills. These are not luxuries. These are tools of the profession. keeping your mental health and your well-being at the forefront is part of being a good clinician. So let's talk about some of these mindfulness-based techniques. So mindfulness is the practice of noticing the present moment without judgment. It can be harder than it sounds. In the NICU, you can practice mindfulness, and it can look like taking 3 deep breaths before entering a new patient room, meaning you would take the time to keep yourself accountable to take 3 deep breaths as you're walking at the door of the room, keeping yourself accountable that you will take 3 simple breaths deeply and fully before you enter a patient's room. Something as simple as that can make a huge difference. Something else you could try, a grounding exercise, noticing the feel of your feet in the ground in your shoes, or your hands as you wash them, bringing your attention to those specific parts of your body intentionally. It's a great way to ground yourself. You could also try doing a 30-second grounding exercise between emotionally intense tasks. Something as simple as pointing out 3 red things in your environment, thinking on what are 3 things I hear if I close my eyes. 30 seconds of grounding can go a long way, especially when they're between emotionally intense tasks. Keep in mind, mindfulness does not mean escaping the stress. It means staying centered in it so it doesn't carry you away. Something else to try are breathing techniques. Box breathing is a commonplace practice. Box breathing means inhaling for 4 seconds, holding for 4 seconds, exhaling for 4 seconds, and holding for 4 seconds before inhaling again. Box breathing helps lower heart rate and cortisol levels. It is ideal to use this right after a difficult code or family meeting, before charting, when feeling emotionally flooded, or even when taking a break in the break room or while taking a walk. Importantly, you can do box breathing while you do anything else. You can be box breathing while charting. You could be box breathing while walking over to the bathroom. The important part is to find the space, find the moment, and engage. These short, intentional moments of regulation can reset your nervous system in under a minute and can set you up for success for your next patient. Now, lastly, physical and sensory regulation is also very important. Progressive muscle relaxation is a great tool to have in your back pocket. Think about tightening and releasing one muscle group at a time, from the base of your feet all the way to the top of your neck. This can take 30 seconds. It can take 30 minutes. Whatever time you have, you can spend with progressive muscle relaxation to exhaust and release tension built up in your body by your work. In a pinch, you can also take cold water to the backs of your wrists or your neck. This trick activates your vagus nerve and signals safety to your body. It's a great way to come back to baseline during difficult times at work. Also, simple movement can do the trick. Something as simple as stretching between rounds or walking the hallway mindfully for 2 minutes can make a huge difference. Your body holds your stress, but you can also use your body to release it. Also, think about cognitive and emotional coping. Bringing your coping strategies up to your brain, we can use things like cognitive reframing. When you catch yourself in self-blame or hopelessness, Ask, is there another way to view this? Or is my perspective here all the way correct? Are there different ways to view what I'm experiencing right now? What is the other person's perspective? Cognitive reframing is a great tool to connect cognition and emotional reactivity. Also consider positive journaling. Something as simple as writing down 1 to 2 meaningful moments or gratitudes after a shift, or just thinking them as you're walking back to your car. It's a great way to align your perspectives. Also, do not discount the power of peer support. Debriefing with a trusted colleague, even briefly, can reduce isolation and validate your experience. Cognitive and emotional coping are big parts of preventing burnout and compassion fatigue. One of the most healing things you can hear from a coworker is, I feel that too. So leaning on a trusted person or becoming a trusted person can be very helpful as well. Now, all things being fair, coping strategies in the NICU need to be realistic. Coping strategies must be brief, simple, and repeatable in high pressure environments. You can aim to practice any of the skills I've shared with you here as micro interventions. 30 seconds here, 1 minute there can make a difference. And importantly, remember that consistency matters more than duration. Practicing daily, even for 1 minute, builds resilience. Keep in mind the best strategy is the one that you will actually use. Start small, but start anywhere. Now let's discuss building your toolkit. Self-care is one of those words that people often use, but often don't engage in, especially in caregiver roles like NICU nursing. Self-care includes many things, like setting boundaries, getting rest, and leaning on your support. Debriefing with peers, seeking supervision, or something as simple as reflecting in a journal or quiet time. You can find small pockets of space for self-care. Sometimes a little goes a long way. Even when you feel like you have very little control over your work, your schedule, or other aspects of your life, there are usually small spaces where you can course correct with self-care. Again, even something as simple as placing yourself on a sleep schedule or meal planning can add some balance to your life. Think about all the spaces where you can add a bit more balance. Sleep hygiene, moving your body, peer support, journaling, setting boundaries. And sometimes that just means being able to say no. Seeking supervision clinically or finding counseling. Start anywhere. Self-care, again, is not a luxury. It is part of being a good clinician. Now let's jump over to supporting our NICU families. If you are operating at your optimal level, you will be able to support NICU families at your optimal level. Let's talk about what this means for your time in direct care and how you can show up for your NICU families. Families in the NICU are often anxious and grieving. We can make small changes during direct care to make a greater impact on those families. Being in a healthy mental space means you can use empathetic listening, such as open-ended questions, and encourage communication to help build rapport with families. You'll have more space to validate their emotions and concerns, and you'll be able to speak clearly and explain plans of care with compassion. Being in a healthy mental space means you can meet families as a person, not just a practitioner, and that will impact their care and their entire experience in the NICU. but also importantly, it would help you process those difficult experiences in the NICU environment. Healthy well-being breeds more healthy well-being. So here's some strategies you can use as early as tomorrow to support NICU families. You can validate emotions simply by repeating the last thing they said or using the same language that they're using to describe their current emotional state. You can take the time to explain medical information in plain language. And you can offer family-centered care options, such as kangaroo care, and finding ways to deliver updates in a way that's family-centered and gives them care options. Let's talk about what this looks like when you are communicating under stress. Calm, clear communication reduces patient trauma, family trauma, and caregiver trauma. Here's some strategies you can start using as soon as tomorrow. Pause, plan, proceed. Do quick, brief mental checks before speaking for yourself and for your families. Think about where your mental space is and where their mental space might be before debriefing. You can acknowledge, align, and assure to address parental distress. Validate their emotions, align with what they're feeling, and reassure them about the clinical care you are providing. And lastly, providing realistic hope and next step clarity is a huge part of communicating under stress. Giving families, parents, and other caregivers clarity in the treatment that they are currently receiving or will be receiving can set them up for emotional success and will impart feedback to you later on. Trauma and PTSD in the NICU. Parents and staff alike can both experience trauma symptoms. As we've talked about, vicarious trauma among NICU nurses is real, and acknowledging these experiences is the first step towards healing. Parents often experience trauma and PTSD symptoms in the NICU as well, which include intrusive memories, hypervigilance, and avoidance. For staff, that often shows up as vicarious trauma. And for both, PTSD and trauma are real risk factors. And like we've shared, NICU nurses are in a particularly vulnerable state when it comes to trauma and PTSD. Now, tying back what we've learned so far, trauma-sensitive care in the environment is important for not just family, but staff. Thinking about what is within your control in your environment, aim to create a calm space by reducing sensory overload. That means, if possible, to minimize unnecessary alarms for you or your families, giving families space for emotional expression, meaning you have consistent, compassionate interactions with families, and then supporting each other as a staff to prevent re-traumatization. Having private spaces for difficult conversations with families, and encouraging peer support and debriefing after crises. That can mean there are specific strategic support systems in place in your hospital or clinic space, or that's something you create with trusted peers and coworkers in your unit. Now let's recap. NICU professionals face real emotional and psychological demands. Common experiences may include compassion fatigue, burnout, and vicarious trauma, especially with cases involving prolonged grief and uncertainty. Add long shifts and disrupted sleep, recovery and rest become even harder. But there are ways to protect your well-being, such as supportive peer relationships, a strong sense of purpose, and even basic self-care, including physical care like staying hydrated, moving your body, or taking a real break, are all evidence-based protective factors. These are not luxuries. They are vital tools for sustaining yourself in this line of work. Let's explore what self-care looks like in practice. This isn't about perfection. It's about building small, doable habits that can make a difference. First, protect your basics. Think about drinking water regularly, not just when you're already drained and dehydrated. Try to eat a real meal during your shift, not just a small snack. Emotionally, think about 5-minute mindfulness pauses. Start with 30-second mindfulness pauses or grounding techniques that can reset your nervous system. Debriefing with peers also helps release what you're carrying. And if you need support, use counseling or employee assistance programs, resources that may be beneficial to you. Important, boundaries matter too. It is okay to decline extra shifts when you're depleted. It is okay to say no when necessary. Simple rituals like changing clothes, taking a short walk, playing music on your drive home can help you mentally shift out of work mode. Then reflect on your progress. Think about where you started and where you are now, as far as your self-care, your emotional resilience, and keeping yourself accountable. The takeaway here, find what helps and return to it often. Small, consistent steps are what protect your well-being over time. Key takeaways here. Your mental health directly impacts patients and their families. Early recognition and proactive coping are critical. Trauma-informed and compassionate practice benefits everyone and is easier when you are mentally and emotionally fit. Your mental health is essential to providing high-quality care. Recognize early signs of distress, support each other, and use trauma-informed, compassionate practices in your care. Support is available through your hospital, mental health apps, peer groups, literature. There is support out there. Remember, an EAP, an employee assistance program, is a voluntary workplace program that helps staff deal with personal and work-related issues that can affect their job performance, health, and well-being. And most places with clinical staff have some sort of program. Take advantage of all support systems available to you. Normalize asking for help. Share resources with your colleagues too. Hold those around you accountable for their mental health and well-being. And maybe, if you're feeling brave, ask for the same in return. Thank you all for showing up today and every day, for your patients, their families, and each other. And I will pass it back to Diana.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, for that really informative and insightful presentation. This webinar highlighted the critical importance of recognizing and addressing burnout and compassion fatigue among NICU nurses, while also equipping them with practical strategies to manage stress and support families facing trauma. We hope that those of you watching also identified lots of valuable information to take into your roles as NICU professionals. Thank you to Kiizzy, whose partnership makes this micro-learning series possible. Kiizzy is a global biopharmaceutical company committed to developing and commercializing innovative therapeutic solutions in respiratory health, rare diseases, and specialty care. The company's mission is to improve people's quality of life and act responsibly toward both the community and the environment. Once again, this presentation is worth 1 continuing education credit for NICU nurses. Click the link on your screen at the end of this video to claim your continuing education credits. Thank you again for your time, and we hope to see you in the second installment of this micro-learning video series for NICU professionals, in which we'll talk about the power of effective communication in the NICU. Thank you, everyone.